Listening Fanfiction presents Expectations by Lancey Lace 963. Based on the cartoon series Arcane, League of Legends from Netflix. Read for you by Sierra Feast. Okay, despite what Viktor might tell anyone, Jayce knew what courting was. Textbook terms. At least his mother was a beta, and so was his father, so it wasn't really something they had to participate in growing up. He knew the steps that had been laid down for alphas for centuries before he had been even a twinkle in his mother's eye. He could confidently recite them in order, too. He had been trying to seem open to courting Viktor since that night he stayed with him during the aftermath of his heat, but Viktor seemed perplexed about it at best, downright dismissing it at worst, which made it all the more shocking when Viktor had handed him a deep royal blue necktie saturated in his scent, which completely and utterly blindsided him. Jayce stood in their lab, staring at Viktor like a deer caught in headlights. Viktor blinked up at him in confusion that was quickly turning into something darker, scent souring under the worn-down scent blockers. I understand. Perhaps I've misread. Wait, it's okay. It's not a no. It's just, I didn't think you felt the same. Viktor's heavy brow furrowed slightly. So then, Jayce, I've been courting you for months? Viktor said slowly, as though Jayce had gotten hit in the head by a particularly blunt object and was making sure he still had most of his autonomy. No, I've been trying to initiate courting for months, and you haven't shown any signs of being interested in it. Jayce defended himself, trying to keep himself from pouting at the admission. He was a grown man for Jaina's sake. I wouldn't have... Alright, clearly we are miscommunicating on something. What do you think courting is? The standard stuff you're taught in school, Vic. You know this. Humor me, Jayce. What are the steps of courting you grew up with? Jayce looked at him for a long time, scanning his face for signs of humor or exasperation, but found only the determined look that he got whenever they were stuck on their projects. He was trying to figure out what the kink in their communication was, probably thinking up hypotheses as he went. Well, step one is you would have flowers sent to the family's house. Usually they're favorites, but there's a couple different kinds you can pick from that are more socially acceptable. Viktor snorted quietly, making a dismissive gesture with a long, elegant hand when Jayce shot him a withering look. Nothing. Of course, Piltover has socially acceptable flowers. Continue, please. Viktor replied, a small smile playing over his thin lips. Well, there are! You wouldn't send over Columbine or a single daffodil to someone you're interested in dating, would you? It was Jayce's turn to scoff at the thought, but the more Jayce spoke, the more Viktor's brows lowered, a crease forming between them. Jayce was beginning to think that maybe the divide between what they thought socially correct courting was wider than he first thought. Flowers have a language, right? Obviously, roses are love, stuff like that, but even the colors of them can change their language. A lot of flowers have more subtle meanings. Columbine means foolishness or folly. A single daffodil means misfortune, while several of them mean respect and unequaled love. If you want to court someone, you'd get them a flower that has a good meaning that isn't too, explicit in nature, Jayce explained. Viktor nodded as he listened. That seems needlessly complicated, Viktor hummed. What does Zaun do then, if you guys are courting someone? Viktor looked up for a moment, making a sort of wishy-washy head movement. It depends on how deep you go down. People tend to care a bit less about formality when it's harder to get by. In my sector, your first step would be painting your last name on the door or the person you intended on courting. Oh, don't look so aghast, Jayce. It's perfectly normal. Not many of us have last names in the fissures, so if you had one, then it meant you at least had lineage. If the name wasn't scraped or scrubbed off the door within the next week, that meant that they had accepted your offer of courtship. Jayce closed his mouth that had fallen open in shock. Something that forward in Piltover might have gotten you arrested for Jaina's sake. Wait, so after you literally write your name on their door, what comes after that? No, you first. We've established an order," Viktor countered with a grin, settling down on the chair he had rolled over to sit across from him. "Counterpoint. You said you've been courting me, and yet there's no name on the door?" "You mean to tell me you don't see the gold plaques I had commissioned for the lab?" Viktor drawled, something mischievous sparkling in his eye. Jayce's mouth dropped open again. This was going to be a repeated offense in this conversation, he was realizing. "Those... Viktor, you told me adding my last name to your plaque was a typo!" "Sorry, I don't have one, so I had to borrow yours. I hope you do not mind," Viktor replied with a fake innocence that made Jayce want to giggle if it wasn't for the shock causing his brain to malfunction. "I can't believe you," Jayce grumbled, rubbing his eyes with his index finger and thumb. "Let's not get caught up in that yet. What is the next step in Piltover customs?" "We're putting a pin in that conversation, don't think I'll forget it." Jayce was definitely not pouting as he thought about the next step. Well, next would be exchanging letters." "Do you not know each other privy to courtship?" Viktor jokes, his eyes widening when he sees Jayce's expression. "No. Strangers? Good grief. Just let me tell you the steps!" "A lot of people meet at parties or balls, and you would just have to ask around or find out who it was so you could get their information if you didn't introduce yourselves." Jayce rushed out the explanation. "Creeps, the lot of you can't even make a normal introduction. What if the Omega didn't like the Alpha, and suddenly the Alpha had your address and information? Absolutely terrifying. That would have gotten you beaten up in the lanes. Never mind the fissures." Viktor moved closer during the conversation until he was close enough with their knees to almost nag together as Viktor readjusted in his seat. The two of them no longer applied their scent blockers as religiously as they had before, whatever this blooming affection was. Their scents twined together pleasantly, sweet and woodsy, unconsciously relaxing them and slowing their frustration towards each other. All right, I get it, we're weird. What would you do?" Usually, you would bring some kind of a offering, a dowry of sorts, something to show that you could provide for your mate. Food is most popular, obviously, but money and resources would work too. To show that you could provide stability is one of the most important things down there, because if you think about it, that Omega is trusting this person enough to leave the numbers and safety of their own pack or house to you. For them, you had to prove you were a reliable mate. Viktor explained. "So you... Oh, the meals!" Viktor had steadily been bringing food for them to share at the lab, maybe every other day in the lab, insisting he try new foods outside of Piltover's cushy cafes and dining, and to savor rich broths and cuts of meat seasoned with a barrage of spices that Jayce had never been exposed to. It was a welcome break from their work and turned something that felt like a chore into something more enjoyable. "And now it clicks. Wait, so you thought that after inviting me into your nest, I would just pretend as though everything was normal?" Viktor asked, uncharacteristically softening and somewhat incredulous at the same time. Viktor had a talent for that. Jayce reached up to rub the back of his neck, feeling his shoulders curl a bit. "I mean, I wouldn't have been that upset by it. You could have just been being nice." Your lack of... Viktor started biting off the end of his sentence with a huff of fond exasperation. "You have a very humble view of yourself," he finished after a long pause of trying to figure out how to phrase what he wanted to. Clearly, humble wasn't the first word that came to mind. Yeah. Anyway, next step was chaperoned outings like walks or getting coffee together. That's where that safety thing kicks in. It's not only to make sure they aren't doing anything untoward, it's also for the Omega's safety. If the chaperone thinks that the Omega would be in danger with that Alpha, then the courtship is over. No exceptions. The chaperone is usually someone from the Omega's family, but if you can, you'd pick a mutual friend of them both. Jayce quickly wanted to steer away the conversation from how he viewed himself. That was not something he was ready to delve into just yet. "Sharing clothes for us," said Mocking. "A way for two mates to get used to each other's sense, and a way of protecting their mate. It's a mutual exchange," Viktor replied simply. "Oh, that's actually not too far off from the next step in Piltover. We actually have little bits of jewelry. You'd take out the little bit of fabric in the locket, rub it on your scent glands, and put it inside. It's like a diffuser. Jayce was grateful for the common ground, that the divide between cultures was closing in on something more familiar. Well, do not be so sure. The last few steps are usually very close to each other. First you'll nest, and usually the alpha would do this, create a safe space in their own home for the omega, carve out space for them, sometimes literally if you live in the stone walls of the fissures. And then, claiming bites is usually right behind. A pretty scarlet blush had made itself home on Viktor's cheeks as his eyes found a particularly interesting spot on the wall. I can see now why offering you the necktie may have been sudden for you. Well, it doesn't help that I'm apparently blind to courting, but yeah, for us the last step is actually claiming jewelry. Usually a gold or silver necklace that the Omega would wear. Something, sometimes with the Alpha's house or last name engraved on it.
Viktor wrinkled his nose a bit at that. That seems demeaning.
Jayce couldn't help the blush that warmed his own face. Yeah, but it kinda seems nice. To me, at least. It's meant as protection, since Piltover fashion usually covers up any mating bites. Actually, it's a little scandalous to air out your bite like that, like a hickey or something. So the collar acts like a socially acceptable mark? Jayce shrugged. I'll admit that one is a little weird. Sure, but it is important to you. Yes? It could be something absolutely ridiculous to me. But if it is important to you and your appearances, then I can play by the rules. Viktor insisted. Jayce felt a smile, a real beaming smile, steal across his face. The idea of being courted? It was something he didn't think he would get to experience, to be honest. He knew by Piltover standards he was massive for an Omega, with his own legacy and stubbornness. He certainly wasn't going to get the first pick of respectful, well-off alphas. Viktor must have noticed the bashfulness that had overtaken him, or maybe it was the sweetening of his said sugary as sweet milk, that he took his cane and stood up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go purchase some flowers, preferably ones with absolutely explicit meanings. I'll have to do some research. Viktor! End of Expectations by Lancey Lance 963. If you enjoyed this recording of the content as much as I did, please leave a comment below or a review for the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thank you for listening. If you wish to support this channel, please like and subscribe.